Hi, Brent. Absolute pleasure to be able to speak to you about this incredible film. Um,
Uh,
Maybe you could just kick off with a brief introduction. I mean, where did your interest first begin, in Brian Wilson? I guess first and foremost as an artist, but when did you decide that it would be a great idea to make this kind of documentary slash biopic?
Thank you. No, thank you for having me. It's a bit of a long answer. I'll try to keep it short, but I'm actually been a Beach Boy fan, a Brian Wilson fan since the age of 9. I saw my very first Beach Boy concert at 9. That summer, my father had passed away, and I was going through his record collection, just trying to kind of get an understanding, I guess, of who this band was, and I came across a record with a really cool Corvette on the cover with these guys in a blue jacket, and they look like badasses. And I thought, well, that's kind of neat. And so I put that record on, and the first song was Shut Down. And the first line in Shut Down is tack it up, Buddy's gonna shut you down. Well, my father's name was Buddy. So I thought to myself, oh my gosh, they're singing about my dad. This has got to be the greatest band in the world. So that began a very long journey. Brian Wilson's music is part of my life, and it's been there, since I was 9. I had dreams of becoming a filmmaker, around 13. I began that journey, and fortunately, I've never had a job or done anything other than make films, and so to now be able to combine these two and make about Brian Wilson is an incredible gift that I'm so proud of. So that's kind of my backstory, a long answer to the to the first part of the question, and then where the idea came from is, as I was saying, I'm a fan, and I watched a concert. It ended up being Brian Wilson's 75th birthday show at the Greek, and so this would have been 5 years ago. And I had a nice seat in the front. And during that show, at some point, they brought out a big birthday cake and all of Brian's kids and grandkids. And he's got 5 adopted children and 2 children, Carney and Wendy Wilson Phillips, and they have children, so he's probably got grandkids, and they're all surrounding Brian with this birthday cake. And in the audience, the Greek starts to sing happy birthday to him. And I'm sitting there and I'm watching him, and I thought to myself, my God, how did Brian Wilson, who at 25 couldn't perform, now he's on stage singing to 15,000 people? How did Brian Wilson, who at 35 was so riddled with addiction and all of all of that baggage that keeps you separated from love, find himself now surrounded by love? And a man who was so controlled, who couldn't create music, still out there creating music. How did he get to this point in his life? And just as a fan, I just kind of sat there marveling at that. And on the way home, I thought to myself, you know what? I still think there's a story to be told. There's been so much done with Brian. There's multiple documentaries, amazing documentaries, incredible movies, Love and Mercy, several bad TV movies, books, paintings, and he's become a legend. And I thought, can I somehow find a way to separate the man from the legend? If I can find a way to do that, that would be an amazing film to see.
And obviously, your first challenge was, he notoriously hates being interviewed. So I guess that was kind of, something that must have troubled you from the get-go and throughout the process, but in a strange way has also given birth to this incredible, unconventional sort of concept of the road trip with Jason Fine. So what was that like? And, were you kind of actually pleasantly surprised with the outcome, that you got this kind of really unique documentary out of it, even if it was something, for any kind of journalist or documentary maker, someone not wanting to be interviewed is a real hurdle.
No, you're 100% right. And what's the saying? Necessity is the mother of invention. This was purely the necessity. It was not my goal to do it this way. I tried to interview Brian 3 different times, and I knew that I needed to make him feel comfortable. So I knew I didn't want to. So I had these different ideas. The first idea was I tried to interview him where it was just me and him, and it was just audio only, and we just had a recorder, and that went bad. Then I was like, okay, I've got this idea. Let's put in a piano in a studio, Capitol Studio, and I'll put some people around him, some of his friends. I'll try it that way. That went poorly. Then I was like, okay, let me interview him in his house, in his music room where he's most comfortable. And that went even worse. So at that point, I thought, well, that's it. My career's over. I don't have a movie. I'll never work again. And, I should polish up my resume. Um, and that was when Gene Severs, Brian's manager, suggested we speak to Jason. And Jason had written this beautiful article called Brian Wilson's Better Days. And in that article, he talked about just driving around with Brian, and they would go visit places and listen to music. And I thought to myself, boy, that's the movie I want to see. And so on the phone with Jason, I kind of pitched him my idea, and he said yes, shockingly. And I don't think Jason quite understood, what was going to entail, but he said yes, and so I took him up on it, and yeah, we began this process of putting Brian in a car loaded with music, his favorite music. We set cameras so that there wouldn't have to be a camera operator, and we rigged audio in the car so that he wouldn't have to wear a microphone, and then just did everything we could to try to make Brian as comfortable as we could. Because as you said, he does not like being interviewed, and anybody who's seen him on television knows it is painful, and I experienced that firsthand.
Even to the point where, I was sort of reading in the notes that you had hours and hours of them kind of riding around in this car. And of course, well, I guess at the best of times, people aren't always chatting, there's lulls in conversation, but even more exaggerated with Brian. And you're sort of wondering, do we even have enough content here? But actually, once you got in the editing room and put it all together, there are these just absolutely golden moments of things that he shares. And even when he is looking out the window, you suddenly realize there's a lot going on there, and there's a lot being processed. So was it kind of a bit of a process for you, even realizing what you had managed to capture for your documentary?
Yeah, no, it was very much a process. And you're right, 70 hours of footage of Jason and Brian in the car. And Jason said that, there will be, stretch Brian won't say anything. And I told, Brian, or Jason said, don't worry about it. I said, that's, tape is cheap. It's kind of the old cliche. But you're right. When you're in the car with a friend, you can go 20 minutes or so and not say anything and just watch out the window. But that was even more exaggerated, with Brian, because Brian could sometimes go an hour and not say anything. And so I was in a travel vehicle, like we were traveling behind them. I could hear what they were saying, and every once in a while Brian would say something that I would be like, oh my god, that's amazing. There would be a 30-second moment where he was talking about, Dennis, and, doing cocaine with Dennis. This is complete open honesty. And I'd be like, oh my God, that's incredible. And then an hour would go by and nothing. So I would get these little nuggets, but I didn't know what we had until we got into the edit bay. And could I put these little nuggets together? And then, as you said, Sarah, the other thing that I saw, but I didn't know if the audience would see and appreciate, were the moments where Brian didn't say anything. I saw the emotions on his face. I could see the expression in his eyes, and I was eager to try to honor those moments, and to honor what Brian was, how he was feeling by not saying anything. But what I didn't know is would the audience come along for that? Would the audience, and so I'm hopeful that audiences come to understand and appreciate Brian just as much through those silences as they do when Brian speaks.
And of course, you couldn't go without mentioning the incredible kind of talking heads, if you want to call them, that you've got in your film. I mean, these aren't just kind of music critics, but, other absolute legends of the music business, the likes of Elton John, the likes of Bruce Springsteen. And it's actually incredible just to hear, not just kind of a layperson's appreciation for his music, but these other very accomplished musicians dissecting the way he puts his music together and just being in complete awe or describing how they were inspired. So how did you get in touch with all these people, and were you taken aback at just how admired he is as an artist?
Oh, no, thank you very much for that. Yeah, it was a very specific path that I wanted to take. I wanted to have distinct and unique voices. I was hoping to not have any redundancy, right? So I knew Elton would bring a very unique perspective growing up, obviously, in the UK. Bruce Springsteen growing up, in the United States. Gustavo Dudamel, who conducts the Paris Opera and then the LA Philharmonic. He grew up in Venezuela and he's a conductor of classical music and he loves Brian Wilson. Jim James of My Morning Jacket, kind of the king of cool, right? He's an indie music guy and he's a rocker. Nick Jonas, Jonas Brothers. Nick is a completely different generation. He's 20 some odd years old. His parents were probably kids when Brian's music came out, and yet Nick grew up in a pop band, becoming very famous as a teenager in a group with two brothers. And I thought that was going to be a unique perspective. So that was the idea, is if we could bring in together unique perspectives from different genres, from different parts of the world, maybe somehow we could try to understand the mystery of Brian's music, and try to get an understanding of how it is that he does what he does. But to be honest, I think, there's a moment with Don Was in the film where Don Was, who's the preeminent producer working today, probably Rolling Stones, everybody, Norah Jones. And, Don looks up at the camera and goes, I don't know how you do this. He goes, I've been making records for 40 years and I don't know how Brian does what he does. So at the end of the day, I still think it's a mystery. And there's probably something to do with the divine, I think, that allows Brian to do whatever he does. But we certainly tried to get an understanding, and it was an absolute pleasure, as you said, to see Springsteen and get his take on what makes Brian's music so incredible, or Elton John, and the passion and the love that they have for that person, that man, and his music.
And what do you ultimately hope that people take away from watching the film? Because I guess it's part kind of tribute to him as an artist, but then there's lots of other themes that come out from watching it. He's a survivor. He's, like you say, bounced back from kind of, so much loss and so many kind of hard moments in his life. So do you think there's also something people can take away kind of on an individual level about being able to make it through and just kind of keeping going, and maybe being a tortured artist in some ways? Is there kind of a necessary downside to being able to be such an incredible artist, that there's that loneliness and there's that troubled side to it?
Yeah, no, 100%, Sarah, and that's an excellent question. And I hope if people could take one thing away from the film, it would be that Brian Wilson is a survivor, and that Brian Wilson is a brave man. He deals with mental health every day. The part of the film, one of the purposes of the film, try to walk a mile in Brian's shoes, right? Put you in the back seat with Brian Wilson and let you see what it's like for him on a daily basis. Brian struggles with mental illness. It doesn't go away. It's never cured. It has its good days. It has its bad days. It can be regulated and medicated, but it doesn't go away. And yet, despite that, every day Brian finds a way to carry on. And I think that I find that inspiring. And I hope uh, when people see the film, they'll also be inspired by that they will absolutely take this as, if Brian Wilson can do it, I can do it. Look what he's dealing with, and he finds a way. He finds the courage to go out on stage, and he finds the courage to even go out to have dinner, with Jason. It's still scary for him. So that's the one thing I hope they take away from the film. And then as far as, do you have to be that damaged soul? I think sadly so. There has to be a hole, it seems like, in your life that needs to be filled. And it pains me to say that. I wish it wasn't that way. I don't think, you know, I think there's a lot of great musicians out there, and there's a lot of great music that certainly doesn't have to come from a painful place, but it certainly does seem like some of the greatest music comes from those artists, or some of the greatest art, whether it's paint or prose or music. It does seem to come from those artists who have just such deep holes in their life. They're trying so hard to fill those holes. And I know Brian certainly is that way. He's had so much loss in his life, and so much pain, and filling filling those holes is a part of his daily life. And that's why he continues to try to make music. He continues to perform. At 80 years old, he doesn't need to, but he certainly continues to do so because I think he needs to.
And there almost does seem kind of a pattern when I think of other, even the films that have been made about artists. I mean, not quite the same, but, think of the Whitney Houstons and the Amy Winehouses. You can perhaps see that there is a pattern there, unfortunately, but hopefully, like in his case, he has survived. So it's not the case that it always has to end in the same way, but it does feel like that there's some pattern there.
That's a beautiful way to put it. It doesn't have to end that way, right? Elvis died alone, because of his addictions, whether it was a prescribed medication, or whether it was Amy Winehouse and her, addictions. Like you don't have to die, right? I hope Brian inspires people in that way. And that's a beautiful way to put it, Sarah, is that it doesn't, you don't have to go all the way there, right? You don't have to die. And I think, I can't remember, I read this line and I can't remember, I wish I could give credit to who said it, but it's like, it was a few years ago, they said, if you, in 1985 or whatever it was, if you had put Michael Jackson, Brian Wilson, and Prince in a room together and said, okay, which one of these artists is not going to be with us in 20 years, or which one of these artists is going to be with us in 20 years, you never would have picked Brian Wilson. And yet he's there, right? He is still there. He is a survivor. And that's the story I hope comes through.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all that with us. Can I quickly ask as well if you have another project in the pipeline, another kind of documentary? You're going to be doing something else next?
Yeah, absolutely. I've started on a project that we shot over the summer. Hopefully, we'll be able to announce very soon. It's very different. It's in the sports space. So hopefully we'll be able to talk about that very soon. And then Jason and I are working on projects now that we hope to be able to do. But yeah, we want to be able to hopefully continue this trend of shining a light on some of these artists and exploring, these incredible artists. It's a remarkable world, and I'm constantly amazed by the stories that are out there. So hopefully we'll get an opportunity to tell some more.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for talking to me and for making this incredible documentary. I hope you can get out and see it this week.
Oh, excellent. Thank you, Sarah. I was going to say, Brian loves the UK. I don't, there's a moment that happens that between Brian and Jason. It's not in the film, and I wish it was. Jason and Brian are talking about LA, and Jason asks Brian, he goes, if there's someplace else you could live, besides LA, where would you live? And he says, London. Oh, I'd live in London. And he loves the UK, and we shot there. A lot of the close-ups that you see of the fans are from a stop in London, and so I'm just so happy that the film is being seen there, and I know how much Brian loves the fans in the UK. And I saw him the other day, and he said, I told him, man, we're doing a bunch of these interviews. And he said, is there anything you want me to say? And he goes, yeah, tell him I'm hoping to be back over there soon. So, he wants to tour again and get rid of this stupid COVID and get back out of the road. He wants to come to the UK. So hopefully he'll be there in person soon.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Love that. Thanks a lot, Brent. Sorry about the dodgy connection.
No, it's fine. If it works for you, it works for me.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Cheers.